The federal government really could phase out 75% of California farm workers if it was actually interested in governing. An opinion piece by me, Adreana Langston. To review the articles cited in this opinion piece, please visit the Google Docs folder linked in the video description. This audio piece is approximately 21 minutes long. If you'd like to hear a condensed version of this audio piece, look in the video description for a bookmark called Deep Dive Condensed Version. It will take you straight to the end of the piece with a 6-minute summary. Introduction. I am Adreana Langston, and I live in Long Beach, California. My state and my region have been in the news a lot lately because of ICE raids in the area and the very public displays of displeasure with the raids. Protests, planned and spontaneous, have broken out all over the region. I'm here to discuss one specific industry in California that is heavily dependent on the labor of people who are undocumented and why I think those laborers could and should be replaced. But first, let's go back in history. The Bracero Program and the Johnson tomato harvester. The development of the Johnson tomato harvester started in 1950. Jack Hanna, Department of Vegetable Crops, and Kobe Lorenzen of the Department of Agricultural Engineering, both at University of California, Davis, began development of a system for mechanically harvesting and processing tomatoes. Hanna began breeding a tomato that could withstand the stress of mechanical handling, would ripen uniformly, and would detach from the plant during machine harvesting. Lorenzen worked on a harvesting machine to harvest tomatoes. In the late 1950s, another UC Davis agricultural engineer developed a fruit-to-vine separator for Lorenzen's harvester. By 1960, the University of California had obtained a patent for the new tomato variety, and the Blackwelder Manufacturing Company in Rio Vista, California, undertook manufacturing and selling the first mechanical tomato harvesters. The Johnson tomato harvester sold 75 units in 1964 and 250 units in 1965. What happened between 1964 and 1965? The Bracero Program ended. The Bracero Program, a binational agreement between the United States and Mexico, officially ended on December 31st, 1964. This program, which had provided guest worker visas to millions of Mexican laborers for agricultural and railroad work since 1942, was terminated due to a combination of factors including concerns about its impact on domestic workers, the mechanization of agriculture, and growing awareness of the program's shortcomings. Those shortcomings included exploitation of migrant laborers and seriously negative health effects to the people doing the labor. In fact, it was those shortcomings that spurred the activist farm labor movement of which Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta were leaders. The farming industry in California knew the program was going to end. So the industry partnered with the University of California at Davis to pour research and development money into finding a technological labor-saving solution. The research started in 1950 and the first models of the Johnson tomato harvester were sold in 1964. 12 workers rode on the early machines to sort the fruit, remove green or blemished tomatoes and clods of dirt, requiring 2.9 hours of harvesting labor per ton of fruit. That was a 60% reduction from hand harvesting. In 5 years, 95% of the total California processing tomato crop was harvested by mechanical harvesters. And it's a good thing, too, because when the federal government attempted to recruit young, able-bodied white men to go out into the fields and replace the Mexican laborers who had been deported, the program utterly failed. So just to review. The United States government in 1942 was facing a labor shortage in the railroad building industries and in the farming industry. The U.S. government makes a deal with Mexico to allow guest workers from Mexico to fill that labor shortage gap. Over the years, U.S. white American citizens get antsy about having so many Mexicans in the country. The federal government conducted studies that showed that the low wages paid to braceros actually slowed down wage growth in the farm sector for native-born workers. The Bracero Program is slated to end in 1964. The farming industry knows they cannot lobby strong enough to continue the program. So the farming industry in California partners with state school scientists to come up with a labor-saving technological solution. It takes 14 years, but the solution is a resounding success. Undocumented laborers in California's farming industry in 2025. Now let's jump forward to today. According to a University of California at Merced Community and Labor Center study, today 75% of farm laborers in California are undocumented. 75%. And this has been the case for, at minimum, 2 decades, since the early 2000s. These people are horribly exploited. Liberals like to lionize the farm worker who just came to California to make a better life for his or her family. And that's true. That is exactly why these farm workers come. But that does not change the fact that the entire system is exploitative in a number of ways. It is not, in my opinion, a system that deserves support. It is a system that needs to be disrupted and torn down. Exploitation of undocumented farm workers. Here is an excerpt from the University of California at Merced Review of Literature by Duringer and Sandhu. Women agricultural workers are often systematically subjected to sexual slurs, groping, threats, beating, and even rape in the fields. In California, 80% of agricultural worker women claim that they have experienced sexual harassment. State-run camps house only 12,000 agricultural workers, or approximately 1.5% of the state's agricultural worker population. In addition, migrants can live in the camps only from May 1st to the end of November. If they wish to return, they must move 50 miles or more away from the camp during the off-season. This interrupts their children's education, with some attending up to 4 schools in 2 countries during the year, as a result of which their chance of high school graduation is only 10%. The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that nearly 300,000 agricultural workers are poisoned by pesticides nationwide each year. An estimated 10,000 to 20,000 cases of physician-diagnosed pesticide poisonings have been found to occur in the U.S. agricultural workers, due to which the average life expectancy of agricultural workers is only 49 years. California is the deadliest state in the U.S. for Mexican workers, where nearly 80% are more likely to die on the job than their native-born counterparts. But when I say it is a system that needs to be torn down, I'm not talking about what the Trump administration promised. I'm not talking about mass deportation without due process. I'm not talking about separation of families. To me, that's not governance, that's fascism. Governance would be a systematic and studied plan for how to phase out the need for exploitative human labor in the farming industry. So what would such a plan consist of exactly? Technology advances. It took 14 years from 1950 to 1964 for the best minds in agricultural science to develop the Johnson tomato harvester at University of California at Davis. Now, let me tell you a story about strawberries. In a 2017 article in USA Today, the U.S. farm industry was lamenting the labor pressures it was under. Here's a quote. President Trump's executive order on immigration has much of the tech world rallying against it. But for one small corner, agricultural technology, it represents an opportunity. Farmers have been facing an increasingly tight labor market for years. The immigrant workforce that has long picked and packed the nation's fruits and vegetables move to better jobs as soon as they can, replaced by new immigrants. Due to a strong Mexican economy that's created more opportunity there and increased border enforcement, the number of people to replenish the workforce has dropped significantly, said Eric Nicholson, a national vice president with the United Farm Workers of America. In response to these labor pressures, agribusiness began investing in research and development for mechanization. Here the quote continues. Driscoll's, the nation's largest producer of berries, is working on a robotic strawberry picker with Spain-based Agrobot, but it's several years away from being field ready. Our customers want more berries and we could grow them, but we can't pick and pack them, said Kevin Murphy, CEO of Driscoll's in Watsonville, California. Fast forward to 2020. A Vegetable Growers News article titled Automated Harvesters Power Up for Strawberries touted the fact that machines are picking the strawberry harvest in California fields. The article features 3 technology companies that manufacture strawberry picking robots. The first company, Harvest Crew, was still developing their strawberry picking machine and promised a commercial model within a year. But Advanced Farm and Traptic were telling Vegetable Growers News that they were taking orders currently for machines that could be deployed in strawberry fields right now, if the fields had elevated beds. Here's a quote from the Traptic CEO. "We've demonstrated that this system together is capable of picking berries at very high quality," Anderson said. "We're into our 5th year of field operations, and most importantly, we've been running every day for the last 1.5 years of that. We've demonstrated the ability to run all day, every day, for long periods of time. We're out picking berries continuously. We've tested in every time of year, every field condition. We've tested different plant varieties, every geographic area. We've tested in early season, mid-season, late season. We were out in Oxnard through late May. We've been out in Watsonville through late September. And most importantly, we've found a way to harvest every berry on the ranch for the same or lower cost than what you're paying now, and in a way that increases your yield overall." So in 2017, Driscoll said their strawberry picking machine was several years away from being deployed, and in 2020, the Traptic CEO is telling farmers he has a strawberry picking machine for their elevated bed strawberries today, right now. That is some pretty impressive advancement from taking 14 years to get the Johnson tomato harvester from the lab to the fields. Science has orders of magnitude more computing power than it did in the 1950s to help in research and development. Agricultural science in particular now has the gene editing tool of CRISPR, developed by a woman scientist named Jennifer Doudna at my alma mater, UC Berkeley, to aid in the creation of strains of produce plants that more neatly fit with being mechanically harvested. So no more taking 14 years to develop a tomato plant that could be harvested by the Johnston tomato harvesting machine. Progress needs to be funded. But you know what would make this development go even faster? Government research money. In the articles to which I am linking, it is frequently mentioned that the farmers themselves, or as is often the case, the business that owns the farm, had to come up with millions of dollars for research and development of the harvesting machines. This scrounging for money slows scientific progress. Here's a quote from a Washington Post article about the development of the strawberry picking machines. "Designing a robot with gentle touch is among the biggest technical obstacles to automating the American farm. Reasonably priced fruits and vegetables are at risk without it," growers say, because of a dwindling pool of workers. "The labor force keeps shrinking," says Gary Wisnatsky, a third-generation strawberry farmer. "If we don't solve this with automation, fresh fruits and veggies won't be affordable or even available to the average person." The problem is so pressing that competitors are banding together to fund HARV, which has raised approximately $9 million from corporate behemoths like Driscoll's and Nature Right Farms, as well as local farmers. Wisnatsky, who created HARV with former Intel engineer Bob Pitzer, one of the minds behind the television hit BattleBots, has invested $3 million of his own money. The Trump administration really isn't about deporting illegal immigrants. Here is a link to a 2023 grant proposal from UC Davis to develop a green chili pepper that can be easily harvested by a robot. This is exactly the kind of grant the federal government, run by the Trump administration, is ceasing to fund. At the same time, the Trump administration is saying it wants to get rid of the humans who do the majority of the hand harvesting labor in the farm industry. An administration that was serious about governing would have its stated policy goals in alignment with its budgetary priorities. I do not believe the Trump administration is serious about governing. The Trump administration states that it wants mass deportation for all people residing in the United States without proper documentation. It is no secret that 75 to 85% of California farm labor is made up of people who are undocumented. Yet the Trump administration cuts funding to the agricultural research universities like UC Davis that are trying to develop the plants and machines that would cut the human labor needed on farms. There's a mismatch there, and it belies what the Trump administration's goals truly are. The Trump administration is not serious about governing. It's serious about hacking away at government programs and taking the revenue that is used to fund those programs to instead give tax cuts to the nation's wealthiest people. In addition, the Trump administration is serious about distracting or obfuscating from this huge transfer of wealth upward by scapegoating undocumented immigrants and deploying campaigns of terror that are destined to fail at forcefully removing 12 million undocumented people in 4 years. But the campaigns will be great at terrorizing communities, disrupting the industries which depend on labor from the undocumented people, and implementing Trump's plan to show disregard for the rule of law by flouting orders from the courts and ignoring due process. And all of the Trump administration moves provoke reaction and resistance from those who clearly see what the Trump administration's goals truly are. But I don't think that resistance should be without nuance, no matter how outrageous the Trump administration's actions are. And make no mistake, I think ICE agents wearing masks, showing no badge numbers, producing no warrants signed by judges are all outrageous moves that make them indistinguishable from kidnappers. If the undocumented people can be thrown in the back of a van with no warrant and no access to due process, I myself am not safe from my own government. But that does not change my feeling that an industry labor system that regularly poisons, beats, and rapes the bodies of its undocumented workers needs to be torn down. Immigrant labor in the U.S. farm industry needs to be systematically phased out. The farm industry itself says, and has been saying, immigrant labor is going to be phased out regardless, just due to the demographic, political, and migratory trends. Check out this excerpt from a 2017 Los Angeles Times article about the mechanization in the farm industry. Now, the $47 billion agricultural industry is trying to bring technological innovation up to warp speed before it runs out of low-wage immigrant workers. California will have to remake its fields like it did its factories with more machines and better educated workers to labor beside them, or risk losing entire crops, economists say. California agriculture just isn't going to look the same, said Ed Taylor, a UC Davis rural economist. You're going to be hard-pressed to find crops grown as labor-intensively as they are now. Driscoll's, which grows berries in nearly 24 countries and is the world's top berry grower, already is moving its berries to tabletop troughs, where they are easier for both human and machines to pick, as it has done over the last decade in Australia and Europe. We don't see, no matter what happens, that the labor problem will be solved, said Sojourn Bjorn, president of Driscoll's of the Americas. That's because immigrant farm workers in California's agricultural heartlands are getting older and not being replaced. After decades of crackdowns, the net flow across the U.S.-Mexico border reversed in 2005, a trend that accelerated through 2014, according to a Pew Research Center study. And native-born Americans aren't interested in the job, even at wages that have soared at higher than average rates. We've been masking this problem all these years with a system that basically allowed you to accept fraudulent documents as legal, and that's what's been keeping this workforce going, said Steve Scarconi, whose Fresh Harvest company is among the biggest recruiters of farm labor. And now we find out we don't have much of a labor force up here, at least a legal one. Stated bluntly, there aren't enough new immigrants for the state's nearly 500,000 farm labor jobs, especially as Mexico creates competing manufacturing jobs in its own cities, Taylor said. He has calculated that the pool of potential immigrants from rural Mexico shrinks every year by about 150,000 people. Not surprisingly, wages for crop production have climbed 13% from 2010 to 2015, a higher rate than the state average, according to a Los Angeles Times analysis of Labor Department data. Growers who can afford it have begun offering savings and health plans more commonly found in white-collar jobs, and they're increasingly turning to foreign guest workers, recruiting 11,000 last year, which is a 5-fold jump in just 5 years, the Times found. None of that will solve the problem, economists say. Changing what we grow and how we grow it is all that's left. Now that it is clear that the federal government has no interest in forwarding agricultural science through the funding of research and development, It is up to the states. Californians are notoriously finicky about raising taxes. The Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association was started here in California, after all. But Californians would be wise to see that tax money spent on giving scientific research grants to universities to develop mechanization innovations for the $59 billion per year agricultural industry as an investment in California's economic future and a bulwark against rising produce prices at California grocery stores. My opinion is that if a job is called backbreaking, then beings with backs should not be doing that job. The majority of California's migrant farm labor needs to be phased out completely by mechanization. The remaining jobs will be the jobs of the future of building, working, and maintaining the robot machines that do the backbreaking farm labor for us. This has been a reading of Adreana Langston's "The Federal Government Really Could Phase Out 75% of California Farm Workers If It Was Actually Interested in Governing," as read by me, Adreana Langston. Again, if you are interested in reading any of the articles cited in this piece, please check out the video description and click on the Google Docs folder link. Now we'll go into the 6-minute summarization of the article.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into a really powerful question. Can robots actually replace human farm labor?
Yeah.
Specifically the kind of work often called backbreaking, exploited. We're digging into Adreana Langston's opinion piece, Replacing Exploited Labor with Robots. She makes a case for swapping undocumented labor for technology, particularly in California.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is how direct Langston is. I mean, her argument, considering all the public discussion around undocumented labor, she basically says, look, these jobs involve exploitation, and maybe automation is the answer we should be pursuing. It definitely makes you think about the ethics and the practical side of farming today.
Okay, yeah, let's maybe add some history here.
Sure.
Because this isn't exactly a new idea, technology changing farm work. The Bracero Program, for instance.
Absolutely. The Bracero Program, that was the agreement between the U.S. and Mexico, ran from, 1942 to 1964.
Right.
Brought millions of Mexican guest workers, mostly for agriculture. And its end wasn't random. There were serious concerns about exploitation, really bad health impacts for the workers, how it affected domestic labor.
And that really fueled the whole farm labor movement, didn't it? With Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta.
Exactly. And what's fascinating, kind of linking back to the tech idea, California's farming industry saw the writing on the wall.
They started early.
Yeah, proactively. They partnered with UC Davis way back in 1950 looking for mechanical solutions.
So well before the program actually ended.
Right. They developed things like the Johnson tomato harvester. It first sold in 64, but sales just exploded after the Bracero program officially ended in 65.
And the impact was?
Huge. It cut the labor needed per ton by about 60%. And get this, within 5 years, something like 95% of California's processing tomatoes were being harvested mechanically.
Wow, 5 years. That's
It's really
incredibly fast.
A massive rapid shift.
Okay, so that's the history. How does Langston connect that precedent to, the situation now in California farming?
Well, she points out that today, roughly 75% of farm laborers in California are undocumented. That number has actually been pretty stable for decades.
75%, okay.
And the conditions, often severe exploitation. She cites stats like 80% of women farm workers reporting sexual harassment.
80%.
Yeah. And the average life expectancy for these workers is just 49 years. Plus, you have hundreds of thousands, maybe 300,000 pesticide poisonings nationwide each year.
Gosh, those numbers are stark. So when Langston calls for tearing down this system, what does she actually mean? It sounds pretty radical.
Right, it does sound strong. But she clarifies it's not about mass deportation. She actually speaks out against that.
Okay.
Instead, she frames it as a systematic and studied plan to use technology to essentially phase out the need for that kind of exploitative human labor. It's about changing the work itself.
So technology is the methodical solution. But
Right.
You mentioned the Johnson tomato harvester took, 14 years from research to really hitting the fields. What's the pace like today for agricultural tech?
Oh, it's completely different.
exponentially faster. Take strawberries, for example.
Okay.
In 2017, Driscoll's, the big berry company, they predicted a viable robotic picker was still several years away by 2020. Companies like Traptic were already taking orders, and they were claiming the robots could harvest at the same or lower cost than humans and potentially even increase yield overall.
Just 3 years later. That's incredible speed. What's driving that acceleration?
Well, a few things. Massive increases in computing power, obviously, but also big advances in things like CRISPR gene editing.
Right, so they can tailor the plants themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Edit the plant DNA to make varieties that are better suited for machines to harvest. We're seeing this across lots of crops now. Potatoes, wine grapes, tart cherries, lettuce, sweet cherries, bushberries. The list keeps growing.
That progress is amazing. But you mentioned cost earlier. Is funding bottleneck? Seems like developing these robots isn't cheap.
That's a really key point Langston makes. Often it's down to private funding. Individual farmers or companies scrambling for millions, she says. That definitely slows things down.
Right.
There's a quote from a strawberry farmer, Gary Wisnowski, that sums it up. He basically said, "If we don't solve this with automation, fresh fruits and veggies won't be affordable or even available."
A stark warning.
Yeah. And there's this odd policy disconnect Langston points out, too. You have some political calls for deportation, but at the same time, government funding for the very agricultural research that could reduce the need for that labor, that funding has actually been cut.
That seems counterintuitive.
A mismatch, as she puts it. But interestingly, the industry itself seems to recognize that the reliance on immigrant labor is probably going to phase out anyway.
Why is that?
The workforce is aging, migration patterns are changing. Ed Taylor, an economist at UC Davis, he basically said, California agriculture just isn't going to look the same. The shift is happening one way or another.
So pulling it all together, what's Langston's ultimate vision here?
Her core belief is pretty straightforward, almost simple. If a job is called backbreaking, then beings with backs should not be doing that job.
Right.
Her vision is to systematically use mechanization to phase out the majority of that really tough migrant farm labor. The human jobs that remain, they shift more towards building, operating, maintaining these complex robotic systems.
So different kinds of jobs.
Exactly. Ultimately, her piece really pushes us to ask if pursuing cheap labor is ever worth the cost in human dignity. And she strongly suggests technology offers a way forward, almost a moral path.
It leaves you thinking then. As this automation speeds up in farming, how does that reshape things for us? Not just the food on our plates, but the whole idea of human work. What kind of new skills, maybe in robotics, data science, agricultural engineering, might become crucial as this landscape keeps changing right before our eyes? Something to consider.